Welcome to the Chew Brewer Stew podcast. Every other Sunday, we'll release an episode of the podcast featuring an interview with a business owner in the food industry. From restaurants, to breweries, to bakeries, and everything in between. We ask them about their journey and the process of becoming a successful business owner in hopes of helping others to do the same. I'm Mike Curtin, and the podcast starts now. Welcome to the Chew Brewer Stew podcast. My name is Mike Curtin. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so you never miss another episode of the podcast. Don't forget to follow us on our social media accounts. All links to those and podcast platforms can be found on chewbrewerstew.com. Thank you for joining us for episode number 15 of Chew Brewer Stew. Today I sit down with Dave Lopez, co-owner of Gun Hill Brewing Company in Bronx, New York. Dave talks to us about the current coronavirus situation and how it's affecting his business and his employees. So here it is, episode number 15. I hope you enjoy it. Hey guys, I'm Mike Curtin. This is Chew Brewer Stew, and today I'm with Dave Lopez, co-owner of Gun Hill Brewing Company. Kieran Farrell and Dave Lopez met as teammates on New York Thunderdogs, a semi-pro baseball team based out of New York. One day they were both sitting around having a beer, and the idea came about to open a brewery. They came up with a business plan in 2012, started asking people closest to them if they wanted to invest. In January 2014, they opened Gun Hill Brewing Company, becoming the first production brewery in the Bronx since 1961. And here we are today. How's it going, Dave?
It's going all right.
All right. Dave is joining us through telephone today due to the COVID-19 social distancing of 2020. So let's get right into it, man. I figure right off the bat, I kind of ask you right away. I know a lot of breweries are doing deliveries and a lot are open for can and growler pickup. You guys are doing that right now, correct?
Yeah, that's pretty much all that we can do.
Right. So I know although you still have that business, how bad has this virus and economic shutdown affected your company?
I mean, it's been pretty frustrating, just because our distribution business has essentially come to a halt, and distribution for us was more than 60% of what we were doing. So in the last 2 weeks, it has been noticeable difference, because our distributor right now, they're still able to move packaged product to some stores,
right?
But a lot of what we do is draft, and there are just not bars buying draft right now, because a lot of them are closed, or they're buying package instead of buying keg, because they don't have the ability to fill growlers or crowlers or anything at their bars.
Right. So, is there talk between you and Kieran, or you and other breweries, about the concerns for the future of the companies? For the immediate future, and basically if there's a bailout, how much it will really help you guys?
Well, I think we're still trying to figure out at the end of the day, the most important thing is what landlords are going to be willing to do,
right? And
what kind of relief landlords are going to be willing to give. If landlords are insistent upon people paying their rent and everything else, whether it's keg rentals or anything like that, where if they're still requiring you to pay during this time, you're going to see a lot of breweries that are going to suffer. Right. And again, I haven't read the exact language yet of the bailout that's supposed to be coming. The last thing I just saw was that it might be blocked yet again.
Of course.
I've heard a couple of different things. One, that they're talking about giving small businesses, and I would imagine that breweries would fall under that category, and bars, and specifically bars and restaurants.
I would believe so.
I think that they're giving it's a loan. However, there was wording, I believe, that if you were using it to keep people on payroll, it would probably be forgiven and you wouldn't have to pay it back. I don't know if that's 100% accurate. Right. I don't know what the dollar amount of that would be. But that was one thing that I heard that was being kicked around. Right.
So are you having to let some people go at the moment? Is that affecting you at all?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just the reality at the moment. Like, we've had to stop production. We were unfortunate that we had a bunch of beer in the tanks. So what we did was we were already scheduled to can a bunch of beer. We just canned more than what we were planning on canning. But until we have some sort of clarity as to when we can start really distributing again and when bars and restaurants are going to be able to operate again, there's no real reason to brew, especially because we also still have product at our distributor. So if we need to take something back from our distributor to make things to be able to sell more in the tasting room, we'll do that.
Right.
So we've had to at least temporarily let some staff go.
Yeah, it's tough.
It's really tough.
Yeah.
It's really tough, especially because it's not like they can just go somewhere else.
Right, exactly. Everybody's
there's
kind of
nowhere else
home
right now.
Yeah, this is it's crazy times. It's a little depressing. But I would like to shift to happier times, if we could. When you first opened, neither Kieran or yourself brewed, correct?
Correct.
So, why a brewery?
So, as you mentioned, we met on playing baseball on a baseball team.
Right.
And one of our teammates was actually a home brewer.
Okay.
And he had brewed beer for his wedding that I was at, and I thought it was pretty good, and I had always just said, hey, if you decide that you ever want to start selling beer or do something in making beer and opening a brewery or anything like that, let me know, because I would definitely be interested in being involved in it. And 2 years later, he called me up. He was actually no longer playing on the team, but it was during baseball season, and he called me and he said, I think I'm ready to leave my job and do this full time. And so I mentioned it to Kieran during baseball season, and we were both looking to start our own business, try and be our own bosses, if possible, get out of the corporate world. And as we started doing research, we were like, okay, there are 5 or 6 breweries in New York City right now, and there are 84 in San Diego.
Right.
I'm pretty sure New York City could
use a couple more.
Could withstand a few more breweries opening up and still be okay.
Yeah.
And so the more research we did, the more we're like, okay, this could be a really good opportunity for us to do something where there is a market demand for it, and we can bring a different element to the business than just being the brewers who are really good at brewing beer but don't know the business side of things.
Right.
So we tried to open with this other friend of ours, and we just had a little bit of a difference of opinion on how to form the company. And so we ended up not doing it with him because he needed a lot more than what we thought was needed to start. And we ended up going in a completely different direction and looking for a professional brewer who had been doing it for a while, who could come in right away and really focus on taking care of everything on the production side of the business while we handled everything on the business side.
Right. And that kind of worked out for you really well, because you opened in 2014, and I think was it in Denver, the beer festival. You guys wound up having a gold rated beer, correct?
Yes, we won a gold medal at the Great American Beer Festival 6 months after we opened.
That's how did that feel?
It was pretty satisfying. I mean, I think we were very, very surprised. The guy who we had hired at the time, he had definitely had a reputation specifically for the style that we won. He'd won in the past, so we knew that there was a possibility, or we knew that this was something that could come. But I just don't think we thought 6 months into opening that we had a legitimate chance, or that we certainly didn't expect it.
Right.
I would say so. It was nice because it gives you instant credibility.
Right.
Which was great 6 months in.
So
as we're trying to make a name for ourselves.
Right. Well, you started asking people in 2012 to invest, family and associates and whatnot. What was the morale of the people as you were going to them? What response were they giving back to you?
So that was actually when we first were doing it. That was the thing that we thought was going to take us the longest when we were in the whole startup process.
Right.
And I think we were shocked at how many people were willing to get involved and wanted to get involved, because they just thought it was cool to be able to say that they owned a small part of a brewery, that they could come in and drink free beer and be able to go out to bars and say that they're part of that. So the response was actually it was very, very well received, which probably means that we undersold ourselves a little bit. But
what was something that you never thought that you were going to have to deal with when opening a brewery?
The biggest challenge when we first got going was some of the personalities that we had to deal with.
Right.
Internally, really, and I don't think we fully expected, because of our backgrounds, we just weren't used to dealing with, I would say, the more artistic side of people.
Okay.
Kieran and I are both from the business finance world.
Right.
And in that world, you're only as good as your response time.
Gotcha.
So if you don't answer an email, if you don't call someone back or answer a text message in short order, there's a strong possibility you're going to miss your opportunity to do whatever you need to do.
Right. Communication being very key.
Exactly. And here, there's such a lax attitude, I think, in that, you would send an email and to a let's say a supplier, a malt company or a hops company, and you'd expect to get an answer within a couple hours, and it takes a day or two to get an answer back.
Right.
And I think we weren't used to that. Or you have a question about something that you're brewing or what's coming up, and it's more just sort of, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how everything flows, and we'll get back to you. And we were very much more like regimented, and when we asked the question, we were expecting to know the answer sooner rather than later.
Gotcha.
And I think like one of the things that I see particularly, like, so I'm on the board of the New York City Brewers Guild. Okay. And there are a lot of times where people will send an email out and they'll ask a question, and I sit there and I have my phone with me and the email pops up and I just answer it right away. Right. And people are always still, to this day, even after, knowing me for 6+ years, they're shocked at how quickly I'll answer something.
Right.
And it's just the way that we're wired, where we expect an answer, so we want to give an answer as fast as possible. We want to be able to communicate as fast as possible.
Right. Is that like a hard adjustment for you, having to deal with that, like kind of that weight? I mean, as New Yorkers, you grew up in New York, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so as New Yorkers, I know it's like that response time, that quickness is important. I think it's kind of embedded in us.
Yep. It was hard. It was hard at first. I think I've gotten used to it a little bit.
Right.
It's still one of those things where there are definitely instances where it still drives me crazy if I don't get an answer to something, particularly like the thing that drives me nuts is when you're communicating with someone and you're having a back and forth, and then you respond within a minute or two of them responding to you, and then you don't get any sort of response for another day. And it's like, right. I know you saw this because you were just talking to me, so what are we doing here?
Yeah, right. What do you think so far has been one of the biggest lessons you've learned in this business?
I think it has made me appreciate all different kinds of personalities, I would say.
Right.
I think it's also made me appreciate that sometimes even though you might want to go with your gut and go with your first instinct, sometimes taking a step back and thinking about the bigger picture is oftentimes more important. Even when you need to make decisions kind of quickly, you need to sometimes slow yourself down, and the response you want to give is not always the response that you should give.
Right. So you think on top of that, how important is a mental break from all this for you? Is this something that you need, or is it something that you just,
There are it ebbs and flows. I would say, like, there are times where, I mean, look, as a business owner, you never really take a mental break, because there's always something going on that you need to be thinking about, or there's always something you could be thinking about, or could be working on, or could be trying to improve. But it's the same thing as anything, and that's why people have vacations, or why people go on vacations, because they need to recharge. Right. And I think that in a lot of times, taking a brief mental break, even if it's just for a day or two, it gives you new perspective on things.
Right. How would you say you go about staying ahead of your competition?
I mean, I think that right now that's a great question, and I don't have a great answer, because I think it's so difficult right now to. I guess the answer is we try and be as innovative as possible in what we're brewing.
Right.
We try and come up with as many different ideas or events that are different. Like, I'll give you an example. We just did this past January. We hosted a barrel-aged beer festival at the brewery. So we had 21 or 22 breweries from all over the East Coast at Gun Hill, and everyone brought 2 barrel-aged beers. That was all you could bring, was barrel-aged beers.
Sounds delicious.
There was no one here doing that, and that was something that we were like, okay, why not?
Right.
That's something that could be, as you just said, delicious. It could be a great way to get more people to come to Gun Hill, and then to also introduce them to all these other brands. A lot of them are people that we're friends with. So we try and do things like that, try and just get as creative as we can get, and then also try and push the envelope a little bit with styles of beer that we're making, or varieties of beer, without going too far off the reservation, because it does need to be able to move in bars and restaurants and stores.
Gotcha. So, Dave, who do you think inspired you the most? Where do you get your drive from?
In the beer industry, or just in life in general?
In life in general.
I mean, it's cliche, but I have to say it's from my parents.
Right.
Because it is. I mean, that's something that they just always instilled in me from a very young age, through schoolwork and then through sports, was just to always kind of keep my head down and push forward. And being, as you said, being a New Yorker, but being a New Yorker, being an athlete, there's a competitive drive that I have that really pushes me, which again has to come to a certain degree from my folks.
And who do you think who's inspired you in the beer industry?
Oh, I mean, it's definitely it's weird. It's changed over the years. I mean, as I've been in the industry for longer, and I've gotten to know more and more people, there are definitely people who maybe at one point I was more inspired by, or wanted to be more like, and I don't feel that way anymore. I mean, I think things have changed just so much since we opened, in terms of how the business has evolved. You know, when we opened, it was definitely the distribution model was definitely a bigger deal than it is now. Now it's much more localized and tasting room driven, I would say.
Yes.
So, you know, when we first started, I think we definitely looked at Captain Lawrence, or even on a bigger scale, like a Dogfish Head or a Stone, as someone who was the model to follow.
Right.
And
those
now,
are not too bad of places to look either. So
no, of course not. But now I think, you know, there are a lot of these local breweries that are in the area that we kind of are friends with, or we look at and we try and say, wow, they're doing a really good job. They're doing it right. How do we sort of emulate them in some ways? And just to take it on a much smaller level, like I'll say, there's some guys out in Long Island, Destination Unknown, that we're very good friends with.
Dubco, right?
Yep, and I think they do a great job. Down in Jersey, there's Icarus,
Okay.
Again, guys that we're friends with, but they're doing a really, really great job. And they have really robust tasting rooms, and I think that's something that we would love to be able to emulate.
Gotcha. So was there a defining moment of success for you? And also, how do you really define success?
Those are good questions.
Was there
I mean,
any one moment that kind of sticks out that like made you think like, wow, this is a defining moment in the sense of this would give you recognition?
I think for us we had a couple of, and they were right around the same time. Even was first one was we did a beer with the cast of Hamilton, the Broadway show,
Okay.
and aside from just being a really cool experience, that was big just because of how big Hamilton was becoming at that time.
Yes.
So that got us a ton of publicity, and people from all over the country were asking about how to get their hands on that particular beer. I think another thing was shortly thereafter we got our beer into Madison Square Garden.
That's great.
Which was also, I think, it was pretty exciting, and it was definitely a defining moment for us. I mean, they've subsequently changed the beer program again,
Right.
At the Garden, so it's not there at the moment, but it was there for a couple of years. But those are just on a larger scale. Those are definitely, and then any time we win an award, it's definitely it helps define and shape who we are as a company.
Right. So how do you go about your strategies for marketing?
We and again, there's a lot of it is piggybacking off of how other people do it. Like, if we see something that's successful, we try and emulate it, while maintaining our own individual voice. But a lot of what works these days is really just social media.
Okay.
We don't really have the budget to be able to go and pay for mass marketing stuff or anything like that.
Right.
So we have to keep it and try and be as creative as possible.
Okay. And what do you think's been the biggest change in the last 5 years for you in the industry?
Oh, well, I think the biggest change in the last 5 years has been the sheer number of breweries that have opened up that have made it a much more localized product than it was. So you forget about being out of state. I just mean even in state. Like, you go to any of these places and there's so many brands that that you see that didn't exist or that can have support here. So there's the shelf space is just that much more competitive.
Right. So if somebody was trying to open up their own brewery, what advice would you give them?
Don't do it. No.
Don't do it, especially right now.
Yeah, well, you definitely don't do it right now. Although you could probably get some used equipment pretty cheap.
Right.
Advice: I would say don't have expectations of trying to grow on this massive scale. Know what direction you want to go in. Know what you're good at, and really focus on that. It is true even in this industry. Location.
Right.
You're gonna have to have a tasting room. You want to be in a really good location to drive people there, to have that sense of community.
All right. Well, you said you had a funny story for us.
Yeah. So I mean, it's part funny, part disappointing, but
the tragedy into a comedy.
Yeah, we were very fortunate that for the first, I guess, 3 years, we never had to dump a batch of beer.
Right.
And I guess it was in the winter 2017, maybe 2017, and we had just brewed a batch of beer that was all New York State ingredients, and it was going to be made for New York City Beer Week.
Okay.
And it was about 12:30 at night, and I get text message and a phone call from my partner, from Kieran, and also from one of the bartenders. And I'm like, this is weird. No one ever calls me at this hour, so let me figure out what's going on. And the bartender was freaking out, and because he thought that the brewery was about to explode. And
Okay.
so Kieran's like, look, I'm upstate. Can you do mind checking out? So I was like, yeah, if the brewery's about to explode, yeah, somebody better be there. We better go check it out. So I got in my car and I drove up to the brewery at 12:30 at night. And I get there, and the bartender is literally standing outside the brewery, having a cigarette, like walking back and forth. And I'm like, what's going on? He goes, I don't know. I just think that one of the tanks are about to explode, and I had to get the hell out of there. So I go into the back, and I see nothing but beer just spewing out of one of the fermenters everywhere.
Man.
And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I have no idea if this is a pressure situation or what.
Right.
So I'm calling the assistant brewers. I'm calling the brewer. I'm like FaceTiming with them, showing them the tanks, and they're like, yeah, I don't know what to tell you, but I think you just got to let it go, and we'll check it out after it dies down. It just needs to just let the beer go. So we ended up just letting the beer continue to spill out overnight, and they came in on Monday, and they opened up the tank, and nothing exploded or anything, and it was all because the rubber gaskets around the manway hole, the thing that seals the fermenter up, had a couple of holes in them. So we had this potential scare of the brewery blowing up and tanks exploding, but it was all because of a couple of holes so that there was oxygen getting into the tank.
Oh my God.
And the beer just the pressure got in there, and the beer just started coming out of the manway hole.
Yeah, that sounds pretty miserable.
Yeah, and so we obviously couldn't save any of the.
No.
There was still beer in the tank, but at that point it gets oxidized, and you don't know what else is going to happen to it. So
right.
We had to dump the rest of that. So that was the first time we've ever had to dump beer, and the only time that we've ever completely dumped a batch of beer in 6 years.
That's a pretty good ratio, man, I gotta say.
Well, we've had one instance where we've rather than continue to ferment it and put it out there, we've distilled the beer instead and made it into beer whiskey. So we were still selling it, but just not as beer.
Right. All right. Well, I got the quick fire 5 for you, which is where I ask you 5 quick questions, and just like 1 to 4 word answer.
Okay.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay. One beer from your brewery that you'd suggest people try. Any beer that you made.
If you've never tried Mosaic Soft Serve, you need to try Mosaic Soft Serve, which is a session IPA.
Okay. Favorite style of beer?
I will still say IPA.
Okay. Favorite seasonal beer?
Mexican lager.
Okay. Favorite brewery in Long Island?
That's easy. I'm going to say Dubco.
Okay. Since you played semi-baseball, who is your favorite baseball player of all time?
My favorite baseball player of all time? Well, I'm a big Mets fan.
Really?
And
you're in good company.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little disappointed right now with the Noah Syndergaard news.
Oh, of course.
But I am going to say that my favorite player of all time is probably Gary Carter.
The kid. Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome, man. Well, Dave, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for being my first interview that I was able to do in my sweats, man. That's pretty special. I appreciate it.
I'm glad to help you out there.
Well, stay safe and stay healthy and best of luck. I hope this all, rolls over pretty quickly, man.
Appreciate it.
Hey guys, so that was the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you're able to take something away from that interview as you will with every interview. Special thanks again goes out to Dave Lopez from Gun Hill Brewing in the Bronx. If you're on lockdown during this quarantine and you're in the 5 boroughs, check out Gun Hill's Instagram page for a link to get beers delivered to your front door. Every other Sunday I'll be posting a new podcast, so stay tuned and like I said, subscribe, and you'll never miss another episode. Don't forget to follow us on our social media accounts for video clips of the interviews. Also, if there's something you're curious about knowing from the owners, then I want to ask it. You can email me directly at truebrewerstew.com. Once again, I'm Mike Curtin for True Brewer Stew. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.